Hello, this is Silas. I'm back with the Dishing on Dish series, which is a sub-series in the You Are What You Consume series, which is a series where we talk about consumption of all sorts. And Dishing on Dish is primarily to do dishing on actual dish, because it's in the name. It's kind of like a foodie thing where we just talk about different foods. And I'm here with Stephen, and I'm going to kick it to Stephen, and he's going to tell us a bit about the restaurant that we're discussing. Ready, part one. This is part two. Go ahead, Stephen.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Labor Day to my American friends. So today we're going to be discussing Seäsonal restaurant in Weinbar again. This is going to be part two of the series. We haven't decided how many parts we're going to do because we have a lot of dishes to discuss. But today we're going to start partway into the appetizers and sort of pick up where we left off. For those who want a more in-depth discussion about the restaurant itself, I'd recommend watching part one, because that's where I explained why I worked there, my time there, why I picked it, etc.
Yeah, and the typical thing with this one is we just talk about different things about the food itself, how the food is made, what's the contents in the food, and it's just going on the You Are What You Consume thing, as in the food that we take in is actual food. I just saw this one meme. There's many things come out, and there's different meme templates, and the meme template from the Spider-Man Homecoming trailer, where Wong, I think the guy's name's Wong, Doctor Strange's companion or fellow wizard or something, butler, I don't know. Anyway, he says something to him, then he goes through this portal. So they say, like, if you weigh, he says, if you weigh 99 pounds or something, and if you weigh like 99 kilograms and you eat like he said, if you weigh 99 pounds and you eat a pound of tacos, you are now 1% taco. And then he walks through. So there is that whole aspect where it's like, if you actually take in food, your body breaks it down and builds the body that you are. And now with this Dishing on Dish, we're talking about the actual things, what goes into the food. And you can learn a lot, I think, about different people and different cultures and different things like that with the foods. And one thing that's unique or a bit different than the rest of the series that we've done is we've talked about Minetta Tavern, talked about Huertas, we've talked about DB Bistro. What am I forgetting there?
Casa Mono.
Casa Mono, yes. And this one is seasonal, and Weinbar is different in a way, because although Stephen has been in the food industry and he's had a lot of input and insight in the other ones, this is one he's actually worked in. So there's some extra detail that he can give us here about how some of the dishes, even in the first one, there's some dishes like, I actually came up with this in the actual menu and the actual recipe, and he's telling us about the restaurants. So in a way, this is the first one I think we've done where the restaurant is actually closed. So, but at the same point, there's more information we're getting about this restaurant in different ways than the ones that we've had in the rest of the series. So with that one, I definitely highly suggest you check out part one if you want to know some more about in it. But even going to these ones, Stephen has kept blessing us with different little insights and information about the different dishes and the different background to it. So yeah, sure. I've been enjoying it. Anything else you want to say before we get into it?
Nope, that's all. I was ready to dive right in.
Okay. So the format that we do this is we have our beautiful faces here on the screen. We're doing the intro and the outro, but now I'm going to have our faces go down, and then we're going to get into the actual talking of the actual food. So the food will be on the screen. A small little excuse us for the quality of the images in some of these. We're going to try our best with them, but this was the first restaurant that you worked at, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Second one in the city.
Okay, so second one in the city of New York City. So it was some time back. Stephen might look very youthful, but he's got some years to him. So this was an older camera, and he didn't have it yet in total mind that we'd be doing something like this. But the food will be on the screen, and then we'll talk about the food, and as we go to the different dishes, it'll be there. There'll be a little information below wherever you listen to this. There should be a list of the dishes that will be in this part, so you can jump back and forth. You can take your time and listen to some few dishes and put it to the side, come back later, listen to some few dishes, or jump around to the things that sound most enticing to you, come back to other things. But yeah, thank you all for listening, guys, gals, and everything else in between. And if you're ready, Stephen, let's get into it, right?
Sure thing. Sure.
Okay. So it's an Austrian and German. It's Austrian and German as it goes. And I'm going to garble some of these names, but then Stephen will help me when I get them wrong. This one is a bit of a cheater because I asked him at the start if I'm going to get it, but I've probably already forgotten how it's said. But this is weisser spargel.
Spargel.
Spargel. Okay.
So if you say
Spargel.
and then you say that you add like an H sound to the S and say it with the P as one sound. So it's spargel.
Spargel.
Yeah, there you go.
Spargel. Okay.
Spargel. Yeah.
Spargel.
Yeah.
So go.
There you go. Yeah, you got it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is white asparagus with hollandaise, which is flavored with liquid smoke, and a crispy speck, and a Parisienne boiled potatoes with Chervil butter and more speck.
Sure. So this is a very interesting dish. So for those who don't know, white asparagus is typically in season springtime. This white asparagus came from France. As you can tell, the outside is peeled because the skin on asparagus tends to be very tough. So you peel off the skin, you cut off the bottoms, which are really tough. They can even get woody if they get really thick. It's cooked in milk. You can probably tell by the appearance. Cooked in milk, a little bit of salt for flavor. So the sauce is hollandaise. For those who don't know, we've talked about it in other videos, but basically it's an emulsion based on egg yolk. There's a reduction of vinegar, peppercorns, and shallots. You whip butter into it. That's how you make the sauce. This is flavored with liquid smoke. Liquid smoke, for those who don't know, it's a flavoring agent. You can probably tell by the name. It's mostly it's made off the burnt off residue of stuff, but it gives a smoky flavor to things when you add it. So it complements flavors well. It works well with hollandaise. I used to put it in barbecue sauce. Other places I worked, it's kind of nice. So speck, again, is the German word for bacon. There's also a cured meat called speck, but this is just bacon in general. There's a piece on top here. And then the potatoes, this is pretty interesting. So they're actually potatoes that are scooped out with a Parisian baller. So it's like a melon baller, but they're really small. And then it's cooked in the potatoes are prepared in a Chervil butter. And the way we made the Chervil butter, so I don't think I might have mentioned it in a previous discussion, I forget, but there's a machine called a PacoJet, which is similar to a Robocoup. But the difference is you can actually get the blade to get hot or cold. So you can actually make ice cream in it, because if it gets cold, it'll freeze the ice cream. If it's hot, it'll actually melt things or blend things a certain way, or you can have a more neutral temperature. So the way we made the Chervil oil, if I recall, is there was oil in Chervil in the machine, and that would actually blend it. And you would heat it up enough so the Chervil would actually release some of the color into the oil. You'd strain the oil out, then you would add the oil back into the machine, but you would mix it with butter and some salt for flavoring, and then you would roll up the butter into like a log and then cool it down. And then when it came time to pick this up, you would actually slice off little pieces, then cook the potatoes in that butter. And then there was crispy speck over top, and there was a microgreen. I want to say that I don't think this was, it may have, I don't, this doesn't look like Chervil. It might be like, it looks almost like carrot greens or something by the shape of it, but I'm not 100% sure from memory. All right. Thoughts and comments?
Yeah, we didn't mention, but this was a Michelin Star restaurant. So some of the dishes, one of the things we normally mention in this series is the difficulty of making the food and the cost of the food. As it's closed, so some of the prices he remembers because he was also working there. So we won't really touch on that too much, but we might mention slightly the challenge level of making the dishes. And this one seems to be rather, it's rather hard to duplicate. And it seems some of the things are straightforward, but then doing it in a certain specific way. And I think that's one of the things that put Michelin Star restaurants aside, is the plating and the attention to detail and how they actually present certain foods and choose certain things. They might be able to swap out certain ingredients, but there's an actual intent behind why they're doing it. This looks like, this square thing is some kind of plate, because I'm trying to think, when I first saw it from afar, I don't really, well, some of these things he sends me the images and I'll edit the images to get them ready to post them up, but I don't really read the stuff or go into details of it. So I kind of get an overview of what it is. But when I first saw this, I thought it was maybe an image of it while it's still on the grill being cooked, but this is the actual plate that they served it on?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's kind of like a squarish plate with a square indent in the middle, like a bowl type of thing, but it's rectangular?
Yeah, It's ceramic. It looks like metal, but it was ceramic, if I recall. Yeah.
Interesting. Like, was this the only dish they would serve in this?
If I recall correctly, I think this was, because I remember there was a point where they got different plates and started mixing stuff up. So this may have gone on a different plate, or they may have used this for other stuff. But off the top of my head, I don't remember.
Okay. Yeah. I think it's artichokes and asparagus. I'm not too big a fan of those two things. It's not like truffles where they literally give me a headache and I just don't eat them. But it's an interesting looking dish. I wasn't quite sure what I thought that white stuff was when I was going through the thing. I was like, oh, okay. When I was first going through, but that's the asparagus roots. Interesting. Do you know what's the
Yeah.
background of this dish? Is it come back from this from Austria, from Germany? Did the chefs come make it up themselves? What's the background?
So what white asparagus, like I say, this came from France. It's big around springtime. White asparagus, for those who don't know, it's actually grown inside. That's why it's white, because the
Okay.
sun actually is what helps the chlorophyll develop, which is why asparagus is green. But this is grown in the dark, well, that's why it's white. The flavor, some people say it's a little milder. I mean, it's pretty comparable. Like if I had white aside from, like next to green, maybe I would notice a difference. But I think it's more about presentation and seasonality. Just like, oh, it's springtime, let's put white asparagus on the menu. And then hollandaise is commonly paired with asparagus. Like typically people will do asparagus tips with hollandaise sauce over the top. That's one thing. Of course, bacon add flavors. I mean, you think about like bacon and eggs, that kind of pairing.
Yeah.
Potatoes, I mean, potatoes with butter, but then like chervil gives it flavor plus the coloring and the presentation. So a few different things going on here.
Yeah, then again, also different mouthfeels. I think that's another thing I think you'd
Yeah.
see in some Michelin star restaurants. There's going to be some thought behind the different way it'll feel in
Yeah.
the mouth. You have the crispy bacon, the creamy butter, then you have the kind of more fibrous asparagus, and then you have the boiled potatoes with their kind of smoothness. These are kind of the boiled potatoes would be sort of boiled, and then they kind of make little balls of them.
Yeah, well, you take a Parisian baller, which is like a melon baller, but it's smaller. You scoop them out, you put them in water so they don't oxidize. Then, if I remember correctly, you blanch those, so you cook them a little bit. And
Yeah.
then when it comes time to pick them up, you throw them in, you do a beurre monté. That's a little bit of water, a little bit of the chervil butter. You throw the potatoes and heat them up, and then those get plated like that.
Okay.
And then the speck gets cooked separately. That just gets garnished over the top. In a situation like this, you would typically prepare the speck in advance, put it like in containers at the pass, the expediting station, and then you would just put it on top last minute.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, sounds good. How like
Yeah.
these an appetizer? So what was the
Yeah.
pricing for something like this? Because it
Oh,
seems like it would be kind of difficult to get the white asparagus, or maybe it's now factory and it's easy to do to find them.
this wasn't exorbitant if I recall. I mean, you would pay definitely more than you would for like a salad, but I don't think it was over the top. I mean, it's I don't think I ever got the info on this, so I'm not sure. Sorry.
Okay.
Uh,
So you have anything else to say about that?
nope, that's it.
Okay. So moving on to the next one, and here we have jakobsmuschel.
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 Yeah.
Jakobsmuschel. I had said Jakobsmuschel and then it froze and then editing back in. So again, Jakobsmuschel.
Jakobsmuschel. Yeah.
Jakobsmuschel. Jakobsmuschel.
Yep. There you go. You got it. Yeah.
Okay. And it's Jacob's mussel? Maybe someone
Yeah.
named Jacob invented this dish? Okay.
That's just the German word for scallop. I don't know. I'm not really sure where that comes from. If maybe a German guy prepared scallops and it was named after him. I don't know.
Maybe it could be something biblical. Maybe it was a food coming from that area. I don't know. Okay,
Yeah,
so this is scallop, squid ink, napa cabbage, Granny Smith apple, and horseradish.
Sure. So this is actually a fairly simple dish, but it was elegant. So apple and horseradish is actually big in Austrian cooking. We're going to get into a sauce below that features that. So it's just Granny Smith apple and Napa cabbage julienne that's cut up into thin strips. There was a little bit of lemon, salt, if I remember correctly, a little bit of lemon juice, olive oil, salt, just to sort of dress it. A few some chives too. That's what the green is mixed in. There's actually a chip of Napa cabbage. What you do is you take the leaves, you dip them in simple syrup that's sugar and water that you just bring. It's half sugar, half water. You bring it to a boil, and then what you would do is you would dip the Napa cabbage actually in the syrup and then put it in a dehydrator, would just dry it out. So you would have like a sort of a candied lettuce chip. And then right here you see that's the squid ink. If I remember, it was squid ink. I'm trying to remember if there's anything else in that, like if he added any flavorings, but I think it was a little bit. I mean, squid ink, it doesn't taste like a lot. It has a very strong smell. It's more for presentation. Like if you want to make something look black, and I guess it's big with a lot of seafood dishes. Like you've probably seen squid ink pastas and other things.
Yeah, because it has that strong, striking black, and then you have
Yeah.
the seafood's normally rather white flesh.
Yeah.
So it's a good
Yeah.
contrast to the two things.
Yep.
And again, we're talking about the different mouthfeels. You have the crispy cabbage there. Then you have the kind of what would the mussels? I mean, it's mussels. There's some fibrous nature to it, but it's not with this scallops specific. They definitely.
Well, these scallops should not be overly chewy, I would say. Like a lot of people a lot of people, like, for example, will have certain shellfish, including mussels, like actual mussels, and they don't like them because they complain they're too chewy, but it's usually because they have them overcooked. That's why. Like, these should be more delicate. I mean, you want that brown sear on the outside, but you don't want it to taste like rubber. Like, you don't want to be chewing on this. No.
And this, temperature wise, the scallops will be warm. I mean, they're coming
Yeah.
off of some kind of heating implement, but
Yeah.
the rest of it will be room temperature, right?
Yeah. I mean, the apple and slaw would probably be kind of cooler, maybe like room temp. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm a big fan of scallops and mussels
Yeah.
and the
Me too.
fish. It's
Yeah.
it's one of the free foods I wish was bigger. I wish it was like 10 times bigger. You can have like a massive scallop steak. It's like cut into like a massive like T-bone or something. That'll be good. Maybe if you get those really big, giant clams. I don't know. There's this guy Masaru, is this Japanese guy. He has this YouTube channel where he just does different things with fish and he breaks them down. I really enjoy watching people break down things because I've been breaking down my own meat like, on a regular basis since I was rather young in my teens. No, I was aware of it before I was in my teens, but started during my teens. So he goes in and he actually he actually like shows himself diving in, catching all kinds of weird things like sea cucumbers, like lionfish, and the subtitles are really funny. Well, the guy he goes in and he was catching this clam, and he's like, okay, this clam after this hurricane or typhoon had passed through. It's in Asia, so it's typhoon. But he's this kind of small clam, which is maybe the size of a hand, so like 6 inches long. He's like, oh, this is a clam. So I let it bite me. Oh, it hurt. Like, that hurt my finger. Like, why should you let it bite you? But anyway, with those big giant clams, he was talking about how there is that general myth that, oh, they can eat the person. Most of them don't get to be that massive, but there are occasionally those you really find that are maybe a couple of feet large. So I'm wondering if you could get the actual muscle out of that. Would it just be like a massive steak, kind of?
Well, I was saying too, remember that when you eat scallops, you're eating the adductor muscle. That's the muscle that opens and closes the
Yeah.
shell. So what you're seeing on the plate here is that the actual belly is big. So for one of those massive clams or scallops, the belly would be this huge thing. But then the muscles themselves would probably be like that. Like, they'd be bigger, but I don't know how big they would be. The other thing that just occurred to me is, if you remember the cauliflower soup from the last segment where it's mixed with cream and speck, and then you steam it lightly. Like, I was thinking you
Yeah.
could maybe do that, but like on a bigger scale, like mix, like, take a lot of scallop meat, cream and stuff, mix it together,
Okay.
fold it, and then like shape it and maybe cook that. I mean, maybe try doing that or something. So you'd have essentially like patties, but do like a bigger, but that's one idea. I mean, or you could steam them as well. I mean, I would prefer it seared. I like that texture better, but you could steam
Yeah.
it too if you want to do. Yeah.
Because when they have that imitation crab meat,
Yeah.
it's essentially just different kinds of fish and things like that pureed
Yeah.
or chopped down and then recombined into
Yeah.
something to look like a more solid piece. So there's probably a way you could break down yeah, and also unfortunately some of the things they do in America that they don't necessarily do as much in certain countries, but most definitely Europe. It's coming and it's expanding now here in Kenya and Nairobi. A lot of people still go to the actual butcher and you're getting the animal directly, so you're not dealing with too many issues. But that whole what's it called? The binder that they put into certain meats, where you go into the store, you buy, oh, I'm buying a steak, and it's really like 3 different cuts of meat, and
Yeah.
they put a binder to put it back together. If you actually look at it, you can see they normally has some sheen to it.
Mm.
The muscle in the same direction. That's of course a massive tell. Anything else to say?
Well, I was going to say also, I don't know if I mentioned it before, but it'll come up later in this discussion. There's also something called meat glue, which we use in a few of the dishes. And you'll notice the way that was done is that you would actually take a loin or something, you would cut out all the fat and sinew, but then you would roll it up. And the thing is, the meat glue, it was like, it's an enzyme. I forget the technical name for it, but like, you would sprinkle it on and then you would roll the meat up tightly that you butchered in plastic wrap. And then it would have the cylinder shape, and it would actually, the way the meat glue worked was it would break down the meat, but then it would become sticky and hold together. So then you would have this like nice cylinder of meat, and then you would put that in the pan and cook it, and it would look like a piece of tenderloin or something. But it was like, the idea is that the meat glue holds the shape together, and a cylinder is nice because it's more even cooking, because you just keep rotating it in the pan, where some of these steaks are kind of unevenly shaped and you're not going to get that nice even cooking throughout. So that's one of the other things. Yeah.
Yeah. That one channel I was telling you about before we started recording, the Wolf Tone, that's the first time I really heard about
Yep.
it. It's called transglutaminase.
Yeah.
Transglutaminase. Glutaminase. Yes. So it's a kind of meat glue. It's it's of course it is edible when you're putting stuff that's just going to like kill you when you're on it, but it's just something to be aware of. It's something that will be listed in the ingredients when you're getting certain foods. It should be in there. It's something they should list on. They shouldn't just put it in your food without knowing it's in there because it is an addition, and it's a key thing in imitation crab meat, fish balls, and chicken nuggets. You're going to find a lot of that in there. So yeah.
Sure thing. All right.
Anything else you have to say about this?
No, that's it.
Okay, so we're moving on to the next one, and we have again. I've really forgotten. Jakobsmuschel.
Jakobsmuschel.
Jakobsmuschel. It's a
Yeah.
muschel that's really throwing me off. Jakobsmuschel. I remember Jakob, unfortunately, from watching a lot of Nazi stuff and like the World Wars and stuff. You hear Jakob being called that much. I also had a neighbor named Jakob, and he was from the Middle East. No, not the Middle East. He was from Eastern Europe, but now he's Kenyan as a kid here. Anyway, so this is a Valentine's Day version of bay scallops, truffle puree, black truffle, button mushrooms, and parsley.
Sure. So again, this is Valentine's Day version. We only had it for that one service. So the bay scallop, it's a little smaller than the sea scallop. So if you notice carefully, this is a little on the smaller side. It's a little hard to see, but it's sort of there's one a little closer to us, and then there's one at the top, the like slightly brown thing. That's the scallop. The truffle puree, I'm trying to think how this was made. I mean, I think you can buy actually like a truffle paste, which is like it's like pieces of truffles, but there's also garlic and other mushrooms thrown in because like straight truffles would be too pricey. But it's like garlic, different mushrooms, there's oil, then there's like a little bit of truffle for flavoring. So I think that's kind of what this was. And then black truffle, of course, there's actual truffle grated over top. The button mushrooms are the slightly like lighter things. They were stamped out with the ring mold, if I recall, so they're little cylinder shapes. And then just some fresh parsley on top. Fairly simple dish. Truffles were still in season at the time, so use them up. Yep.
Okay, so the button mushrooms. They're not like smashed down. They're cut into thin slices and then stamped.
Well, so there's actually two preparations. There's the thin slices, but there's also there's like the sort of whiter cylinder looking things. Those were actually like the mushroom itself, but stamped out with it's like almost like a ring mold, but it has like a cylinder shape. And then those were just cooked, so you have like a little like whitish cylinder on the plate. Yeah.
Okay. So are you that the stalk of the mushroom? You mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's stamped out, so it looks a little more refined rather than just a piece thrown on a plate. Yeah.
Yeah, and truffles. Well, y'all might be aware that listening it was one of the most expensive things in the world, from weight to actual price to do it. So it's something that's used sparingly, but as again most of you might know, it does have a very strong smell to it. It's a very potent smell, and it's appealing to a lot of people. And there's a few people like me who literally get a headache from doing it. So I guess that's some sort of allergy probably that's in there, but it's just like from the smell. Yeah.
Well, it could also be a pheromonal thing because there's that whole thing about how pigs and dogs pick them up because they mirror their pheromones. Maybe with you, it's some kind of reverse effect where like something about it, the smell just doesn't agree with you for some reason. Like there are people who feel sick when they smell certain foods, but like to me and others, they're fine. I don't know. Maybe there's like some reverse version of that. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder when it started or if it could end. Yeah, some of these things just come and go. But yeah, it's now again we'll have the crunchiness. Those okay, it says truffle puree, so not really that crunchy.
No.
It looks like it should be crunchy. Those black does look like they should be crunchy.
Well, yeah, the truffle slices would be a little bit, but they're still sort of thin because since truffle is so expensive, you have to slice it thin because if you put on a big thick piece, it's like you're basically throwing money down the drain. Plus, truffle, it's supposed to the flavor of the slice is supposed to be imparted. It's not something like you chew on, you know.
Yeah. Okay, so it'd be kind of flaky, not necessarily crunchy.
Yeah.
Like papery. Papery works. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, because truffle should be like paper thin. I mean, if you have a truffle slicer, and usually in a lot of places you weigh out how much, like you slice them onto a scale, and then it's this many grams on the dish, and like if you like, it can be off by like 1 or 2, but because it's such an expensive item, you try to get it as precise as you can.
Yeah. And you said it's still an appetizer, so you're not going to get too big of it. It's supposed to just get your appetite going. I'm a fan of mushrooms. Like I mentioned, don't mind the taste of truffles, but I probably wouldn't get this just because the truffles on it. But mushroom is a typical mushroom that you'd find in most places.
Yeah. I mean, this is a button mushroom's like one of the most basic mushrooms. Like it's the white button shaped ones.
Yeah.
Because you figure this is one of those dishes where it's like it's not going to be all expensive items, because the idea is that since truffle's expensive, it's like you put a little bit on to flavor it, but it's like you're not going to use like the most expensive mushrooms, most expensive fish, all this, because it's like you'd be throwing money down the drain. So what a lot of these dishes, you'll notice the theme is that there's one or two expensive items and everything else is like fairly common ingredients. I don't want to say cheap ingredients because people hear that, they shut off, but like ingredients that are a little more common, then you have like one or two things that really stand out.
Yeah, that's actually a good idea. It makes sense.
And it's more, and as I've said before too, it's more the technique. Like, you have truffle, which is expensive, but then you have scallops, which are reasonably priced. You have button mushrooms, which are cheap, or parsley is reasonably priced, but the truffles enhance the flavor of the other things. So things like that. Whereas you wouldn't, if you put like 5 expensive things on each dish, I mean, your food cost is going to be through the roof, and it's not really worth it.
And that's I think the mentality that goes into some of these not the cuisine in general, but especially when you're doing it as a business, when you're doing it as a restaurant, when you're doing it as a Michelin Star or high level. As we mentioned in a few recordings ago when we actually talked about the Michelin system, there is some issues with it, as there are with most human organizations that give awards and things like that. Eventually they start having their internal politics. But in general, one thing that's in there, the thought of the plating back there, but you're running a business as well. You're getting into your mind of the cost benefit analysis of putting things. We've talked about this before, how if you have one thing on your menu, you try to have that one thing in a few other dishes. So you're not just buying anything for just one use. Like you try to find a way to have multiple uses, unless it's like a seasonal thing where you're having a special. But this just makes excellent sense to see that how economical are they with the dishes on every dish. If you put something really expensive, it's like having a sports team and you have like a salary cap. You can either decide to spread 10% across for 10 players, or you can spend 90% on a superstar and then try to shore up the rest of the spots by having that, but still keeping within that 100 million for the top. That's as much as you can spend to actually still bring in a profit on your sports team. So that's something I think you have to think of when you're running a restaurant. And that's probably why a lot of restaurants actually go out of business, just not having the right cost benefit analysis on the dishes. Like, I just like this food. I want it to taste this way. So I'm going to have lobster, truffles, all this in one dish because people will come there for that dish. I'm like, yeah, but you can't charge for that single dish 10 times more than everything else in the menu. But if you separate those ingredients onto 10 different dishes, each of those dishes can go 10% more than they are and still make up that same 10% if it was on one dish. And people will be willing to pay that spread apart rather than just in one dish. It makes excellent sense, yeah.
Well, because there was actually some drama earlier on where Frederick, the Swedish guy, he was having issues because the thing is he wanted to do all this expensive stuff, but he was running food costs high. And I'm trying to remember at one point it hit like 30%, which is pretty crazy. And the thing is, like, it's one of those things, like, it's fun for him, but it's like the place can't function like that. I mean, some of these lower end places, food cost is 15 or even 10%. Wow. And that's sort of the cost that's sort of the cost benefit analysis as we're getting at, where like you do cheaper stuff, your budget's going to be a lot lower. And the thing is, you will make a higher profit, but it's also going to limit your level of creativity. But then you go in this other direction, 30% and higher. Yeah, you can work with your dream ingredients, but the restaurant's going to bleed money until you go under. You have to sort of find that in between of, as we're getting at, like, okay, I have a few expensive items here, a few really expensive items, a few moderately priced things, and just sort of find ways to augment each thing.
Okay. So that's the kind of information that I really enjoy having these conversations with, because I've watched foodie stuff, but some of these details you don't really hear unless you have somebody who's been in it. So it's okay. So let me see if I can see 5 primary costs. One would be, of course, the food costs. Then another one would be the actual plates and the utensils and the things that you're using to actually cook the food.
Yeah.
Another one would be the staff, of course.
Yep.
Then another one would be the location. And then utilities, I guess, for power and things. What else is kind of a major thing?
Also beverage costs. I mean, not obviously if you're running a kitchen, but in general, because beverage costs, I mean, there's some places that, believe it or not, have beverage costs at 5% because the markup is so high. And it's like you crank out all these beers and it's like you're charging like way more than you actually paid if you were to break it down serving by serving. But that's how you make money. But there's also an interesting thing legally where if you sell a certain amount of alcohol, you're classified as a bar and you have different legal liabilities. Whereas if you sell more food relative to the alcohol, it's a restaurant. But the thing is, I knew a teacher in culinary school who she and her husband owned a place, and she was saying they sold a certain amount of alcohol, but they were kind of watching it because if it got to a certain level, they'd have to be classified as a bar and they'd have different legal liabilities and things. So people have to consider, like, do we want to be a bar or a restaurant? Who are we aiming towards? Do we want to take on potential legal risks? Like, there's other, things to consider. Oh.
Huh. What kind of legal things would that be? Like poisoning somebody getting alcohol poisoning in your premises or something? What's
Well, I think like that's why places have bouncers because if there's too much alcohol, people might
okay?
act up, and you need someone. If somebody were to get hurt, if people drive away intoxicated, I mean that's a risk in a restaurant too. But I guess with bars, there's more scrutiny on them. Bars, if they're serving underage people, I mean restaurants could too, but I guess they don't pay as much attention to it. All those things. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. And you said that on average, for your average successful up and going restaurant, middling to higher, is the food cost is normally around 20%, you're saying?
I mean, I think at Eddie and the Wolf at one point it was like 10 or 15%. I mean, I don't know. I don't know that there's some magical number here because as I'm saying, it's like you have to weigh the benefit of, yeah, you could do 5% food costs and serve like ground beef and fries, but it's like, do you want to do that? Or you could, do what this other guy was doing where you have all this high end stuff, but you're running costs through the roof. There was one place that I think it hit as high as 40%, but it's like, I mean, that's not sustainable. That's like the only way you could do that would be if you had money from other sources or you were independently
Yeah.
wealthy and you were financing it. And like at that point, it's more of a hobby. It's like you're not looking to make good money off it. So I ideally, from what I've heard, about 10 to 15%. I don't have a magic number because, like I say, it depends on the type of restaurant too. Like I'm sure like Restaurant Danielle is way above that, but I don't know. I don't know what goes into that as far as like what they do in beverage sales versus upcharge for food. I don't know. It's like there's just a lot of things to consider. But it's a good
Yeah.
question though, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. We might look that up if
Yeah.
anybody knows, if
Yeah.
anybody's worked in the industry or knows the highest they've seen or the lowest
Yep.
they've seen where really going to be making too much. People are not going to be repeat customers. And of course, as Stephen mentioned, if it's too high, you just won't be able to have a profit to actually maintain it.
Yeah.
So that'll be interesting or let me know what y'all thought it was. Like, if you're listening to this and you haven't had that question, because I hadn't really considered that before, what do you think it actually was?
Yeah.
It doesn't match close to what you might have thought it was before hearing Stephen explain it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could apply it to other things too. Like you want to buy a car, like, yeah, you would love to have a nice car, but it's like, do you want to pay the cost versus you want something to get around? Yeah, it'll cost you a lot less, but it's like you get what you pay for, and you have to weigh that cost benefit of, if you're middle class, you're not going to go over near me and buy a Lamborghini. But at the same time, you don't want to buy some broken down thing. You have to weigh like, okay, what am I willing to spend? What is it worth willing to what I'm trying to do, et cetera.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So anything
Yeah.
else to say about the jakobsmuschel? Jakobsmuschel.
Yep, you got it.
Okay.
Crucial, yeah.
Anything else you'd say about that?
No, that's all I have.
Okay. So now we're on to the next one. I'm trying to we do this. I'm like, okay, well, how do you say this with the accent and things? Okay. Calibres?
No,
Calibres?
Calbries. It's just two syllables. Calbries.
Calbries.
Calbries. Yep.
Calbries. Okay.
Yep.
So Calbries. This
Yep.
is sweetbreads.
Mhm.
And I'm a fan of sweetbreads. Many people are not. Stephen and I are. So can you explain what these particular sweetbreads are?
So it's the thymus gland of the veal. Kalb is actually German for veal. I'm not sure what Ries means, if it just means or it means like gland or something. In season, typically springtime when they slaughter the lambs. I want to say this is actually one of the best sweetbread preparations I've had to this day. So what you do is the sweetbreads are coated in cornstarch and fried. It's similar. You see this in Chinese cooking, like if you have General Tso's chicken, that's prepared that way, cornstarch and then fried. It's tossed in a sherry vinegar reduction, then seasoned with a blend of Earl Grey tea and salt. So you got a lot of flavors going on. Because the sherry vinegar, when it reduces, it actually becomes sweeter. So there's a bit of that sherry, like wine flavor, a little bit of acidity because it's still vinegar. And then you get like the Earl Grey flavor. If you've had the tea, there's a little bit of citrus notes and other things. And of course, salt enhances the flavor. And then I think is self-explanatory. There's celeriac puree. There's Brussels sprouts. So you take the leaves, you blanch them lightly, just so they're cooked a little bit. You don't want them to be mush, but like so they're not quite as raw. And then the celery is interesting. I'd have to show you how to do it. It's pretty easy though. You just take a peeler and run it along a celery stalk, and the part where If you picture the celery like bowing out, but you take
Yeah.
like along the top, it's actually just like a thin, clear strip like that. It looks elegant, but it's a very simple technique.
Cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, again, talking in the mouthfeels again, you get to have the crunchiness from the sweetbreads, and
yeah,
inside the sweetbreads themselves have a smooth aspect to them,
yeah.
and a very I don't know. Sweetbreads taste alive. Like you can almost taste like the blood and the, the energy of the animal through it. Like certain parts of the animal, I think you can. It's meaty. It's lifey.
So
It's bloody.
it's similar to, I would kind of compare it to a white meat, like kind of similar to chicken, but it kind of has its own flavor too. But like
Yeah.
like it tastes more like chicken than like beef or something if I had to like kind of make a
Yeah.
comparison. Like it has that
Maybe,
white meat kind of flavor. Yeah.
maybe I'm adding the aspect because I see it more as like parts of the animal that were functioning rather than just like the muscles, which is the normal meat
Yeah.
that we eat. And yeah, it's something about like the sweetbreads, the livers, the kidneys that really appeal to me. I don't like hearts for some on,
Uh,
but other kind of off kilter parts, like I really like neck meat because like a lot of the blood goes through, and it's hard to get
yep.
to neck meat after eating like a chicken or something like that. But it's to me, it's worthwhile. It's like going there and dig through those little bones and find things. But yeah, gizzards are also things I especially things like gizzards are amazing. It's like fried gizzards. But yeah, then you have that crunchiness. That then you have the puree. It's not a strong test. Celeriac.
No, that's
Celeriac
the root
puree.
of the celery. It's a white thing. It's very mild. You typically add like butter, cream, all this. It's very big in French cooking. I don't know. I like every place I work, they have a celeriac puree or celeriac soup or something. I like it a lot personally. It has a very mild flavor. I'm not exactly sure how to describe it. Um, the one thing with celeriac though is that like you have to make sure when you peel it, you cut off all the outside because there's like minerals will actually grow in the different grooves, and then actually the minerals will have this almost glass-like texture. So you have to be very thorough at cutting all that skin off. But
Yeah.
usually you cook the root down. It has a very nice, delicate flavor. I mean, I love celery root. I mean, like I said, I've had like puree soup. There was something called crush, which was kind of like it's like the equivalent of smashed potatoes, but with celeriac. That was really nice. Yeah, you could do a lot with it for sure. Yeah.
Okay. And these Brussels sprouts, they look like they're just halved and then steamed or
Oh yeah, yeah.
steamed
So
or
like I said,
blanched. Like
you pull off the leaves and you blanch them briefly, so like it cooks a little bit of the rawness off, but they're still a little crunchy when you bite into them.
yeah. No, it just looks like a really good dish. It looks like one
Yep.
I would really enjoy.
Yeah.
I'd really like to try. And then, of course, now with the really thin celery in there, different mouth feels, it's going to
Yeah.
react through to the warmth in your mouth and saliva in different ways, break down in different ways. And yeah, it looks really good. Another suggestion: if you have certain dishes personally that you make with cabbage, Brussels sprouts are a really good substitute for it. I actually, the first time I did that, and a bit of a pinch was I was making a dish for one of my best friends for her wedding, like one of the meals she had after the wedding, and couldn't find cabbage at the time. So I was like, oh, let's get Brussels sprouts. And I swapped the Brussels sprouts in. I was like, oh, now I've really started doing that with different things. Just switching out cabbage, I mean, switching out the cabbage in most dishes with Brussels sprouts. And it's a different kind of taste, different kind of feel. And they're good little things. I don't know why I
Yeah.
slept on them for so long. For a long time, for some reason, I just wasn't having Brussels sprouts. But then once I had that breakthrough, and I've been using them a lot more.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
used to do too at Eddie and the Wolf. We actually did fried Brussels sprouts. It was really nice. You cut them into quarters and cut out the stems. And then what we do is you would fry them, and then last minute you would throw them in a mixture of a mustard seed vinaigrette and pickled cranberries. And you would throw it on last minute because the thing is, the leaves
Oh,
are crispy, and once they sit for a while, they start to get soggy. But the thing is, they're crispy and they have those textures and flavors, and you run them out to the table and people eat them. Really nice.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I can imagine that whole time aspect on these ones would be very key.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. So anything else you have to say about?
No, that's pretty much it. I mean, we there's another sweetbreads preparation we're about to get into. It's the same. The basis of the sweetbreads in this restaurant was always the same with the cornstarch, sherry, vinegar reduction, Earl Grey, and salt. But the garnish always changed depending on season and what was available. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So on to the next one.
Yep. Apologize for the
Now we,
lousy photo.
yeah, we'll make do. This one's another kalbries, and again, as we'd mentioned, this is the whole idea that if you're trying to do a good job of it, you try to have ingredients that you use in 2 or 3 dishes is a good number. And then, of course, you're going to have some that are very specific to other ones. And then some, of course, are bases that you'll see being repeated in these different dishes and different preparations. So this one is sweetbreads with the same preparation as above, and chestnut chips, chestnut foam, and Brussels sprouts.
Sure. So again, sweetbreads prepared the same way as above. The chestnut foam, I want to say, was a chestnut puree. Like you mix chestnuts, you cook them in cream, and then you puree them with butter, if I recall. Then you put it into one of those foam guns. It's similar to whipped cream canister, and you just shoot it out onto the plate. So it's sort of similar to whipped cream, but you figure the addition of butter and chestnuts, so that's how it has that texture. And then the chestnut chips, if I recall, what they did was they took that puree, but you lay it out on a very thin tray in a dehydrator, and the puree actually dries out, so that's these very thin chips. You break them, you put them on top, and then the Brussels sprouts, same as above. You take the leaves and you just blanch them and put them on top. Yep.
Cool.
Yeah.
And these are the kind of things where they invented these things on their own, right? They just came up with them there. It's not really something like, in Austria, because they weren't really dehydrators back in like all Austria and things like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, people have been drying out food forever, but I think people figured out like, oh, we can take purees and dry them out. We can, you can make jerky, you can make dried fruit, dried vegetables. You can, take certain, people do meringue actually in dehydrators. You pipe meringue and you put it in there, it dries them out. That's how you have meringue crisps. I mean, I think a dehydrator is definitely something else I would get in my ideal kitchen, because I mean, there's different adjustments and you can do all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, this is just those. It's again, this is just the thought that goes into these things. Y'all who are watching this, you can probably just sit down and think of different combinations of different things to do this. It's some kind of fried meat. Then you have the Brussels sprouts, which has gone through with it. Like you might even be able to switch out the Brussels sprouts to different thing. Asparagus, small little like the tops of asparagus, or you had like the beetroot hearts. No, it was rutabaga hearts before. Like there's other things you can switch.
Romaine hearts. Romaine hearts. That's what you're thinking.
To get that same kind of mouthfeel and the same kind of idea, like a smallish, roundish sort of green. And then you see the creaminess, the foaminess here, and then something else. Here they have the crunchiness of the chestnut chips, where above it was the kind of thin paperiness of the grated celery. So it's those kind of 4 things coming together, but then this single dish could be done in a way. And then of course you have the celery itself as being both as the cream and the thin paperiness in the first kalbries, and then here you have the chestnuts themselves also being the same thing of the foam with creaminess and crunchy chips. So it's just, you can see the thought process between the 2 dishes. And I was thinking that there's other things they could have come to. There's other things you could probably think of doing, y'all guys, gals, and everything else in between listening. And I was asking Stephen, do you have anything to do with the foam here in the same way that you did with the lemon foam in the mackerel dish from the first part?
I did not on this dish, but I thought it was interesting because as I was starting to describe, the chip and the foam are basically the same component. It's just one is dehydrated, the other has air whipped into it. But I was thinking you could even do like a frozen component with it. Like you could take that basic chestnut puree idea and just play around with the texture. I mean, you could freeze it, you could dehydrate it, you could whip air into it. I mean, you can take that basic component and just experiment with different textures. And I think, I mean, I think like maybe 2 preparations is good for one dish, because if you were to do like 3 or 4, it'd become kind of redundant. But like, maybe take it and like do it frozen on another dish, or maybe like just do like a swoosh of puree on another dish, or you could do different things.
Yeah, because I was thinking of what if you did like chestnut flour and then you deep fried the sweetbreads in it. But I'm like, 3 things is about too much. That's too much. But you have to swap out one of the things. But
it's that whole bit about complementing versus contrasting, where like if it's 1 or 2 things it complements, but if it's all the same thing, it's just like you might as well just eat like one component. I mean, if they're all so similar. Oh
yeah. So anything else to say?
That's all I have. The sweetbreads, like I say, are one of the best things I've ever had. I mean, when I have my ideal kitchen, I'll probably try and recreate them, because I mean, I was just thinking you could even do chicken prepared like this. Like even just take like bits of chicken, do the cornstarch frying Earl Grey. I mean, they won't be as good as sweetbreads, but I mean, the flavor will be pretty close if you want to do like a cheaper alternative.
Yeah. All right. So the next one we have is okay. Now I'm going definitely to Italian. My mind goes straight to Italian. This one, I'm thinking I'm completely wrong if I say it in Italian way. But pochierties. You see, I'm going completely Latin with it. Pochierties. It's not that.
It's pochierties.
Pochierties. Okay. Pochierties. That's soft poached. Like there's a poach in there. The poach is kind of in there. It's a soft
Yeah,
poached egg, lobster, fried maitake, which is a mushroom, shiitake oil, and fried pumpernickel and lobster foam.
sure. So that just means literally poached egg in German. That's all it means. Soft poached egg. The eggs are cooked sous vide in the shell. Yeah, you, yeah. I mean, a lot of these names are pretty self-explanatory when you translate them. They just wanted to put German on the menu, I guess. But anyway, the eggs are cooked sous vide in the shell. You pull them out when you plate it. The lobsters, they got in whole lobsters. What you do is you blanch the meat. They actually use the combi oven for this too, the one that does the moist as well as dry heat. And what you do is the way a lot of people prepare lobster, Thomas Keller does this too, is you blanch the meat where you cook the meat, you cook the lobster just enough so the meat sort of holds together. Then you pull it out of the shell into whole pieces, and then you cook those pieces in butter. So when you cook the lobster, you're not cooking the meat all the way through. You're just cooking enough so the meat holds together, and you can pull it out of the shell in one piece. That's the idea. You can do that. You can do that in a steamer. You can do that in a combi oven. Some people just do it in a pot on the stove. But it's one of those things like you have a certain technique where you do it at an exact certain timing because you don't want to overcook the lobster, but if it's undercooked, it's going to fall apart when you pull it out. So they have an exact technique for doing this. But this is the knuckle meat here. Usually the claw I think was on other dishes, and then the knuckle meat just gets picked up in butter and put on the plate. The fried the maitake was actually very interesting. It was kind of a pain. You took the maitake, you actually pulled it apart so there were strands. Like you had to have like all these like little strands of maitake, and then you would cook that. You would fry it a little bit in oil, and then you would finish it with some butter and some lemon, and then you would put that actually on the like underneath where the egg is. That was actually like sort of a nest that the egg sat on. So you think about it, it's like little strands of maitake that are fried. That's like the nest, and then the egg sits on top, and then the shiitake oil is just a little bit on top of the egg. You can't see it. And the fried pumpernickel, that's what I described earlier, where you take pumpernickel bread, you puree it with water, you drop it in the fryer. Again, be careful because, water and oil just explodes. But then it becomes this crunchy, almost like more delicate, crumbly crouton texture. It's kind of similar to granola, too, if I had to find a comparison. You put that around the outside. And then the lobster foam, that's from the lobster jus. You roast the shells. You cook them with brandy and vegetables, puree it, strain it off. You take the jus, you puree it with soy lecithin. That's a foam that goes on the plate. And this is probably another one of my favorite dishes of all time for sure.
Yeah,
I threw a lot at you, so go ahead.
sounds really good. I mean, it
Yeah,
sounds yeah, it sounds good. It's definitely a lot different way to have
yeah,
lobster. I haven't seen lobster really served too much. I mean, presented too much in this kind of way.
yeah.
Seems like an interesting way to take that in, and of course a different mouthfeel. So I keep saying mouthfeel a lot, but it's true. I mean, that's really an aspect to it. You have the foam, you have the crunchiness of the bread, you have the lobster itself in there, the oils in there. This seems really good. And then the soft
The
poached egg again.
maitakes underneath would be crunchy too because they're
Yeah,
fried. And
it sounds amazing. And even the
yeah,
different tastes that you got to go in there, some
yeah,
earthiness, some
yeah,
meatiness,
yeah,
the oceanness, then of course the
yeah.
fungi, mushrooms, different particular taste. It must be a really delectable dish. It seems really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
The only thing Austrian about this dish is the pumpernickel bread, though, I would
Okay.
say, because because you figure Austria is a landlocked country, they're not going to serve Maine lobster there. I mean, they
Yeah.
may import it now, but historically that wasn't the norm. Yeah.
It's a shame that this place went out of business, but it happens in some
Yeah.
good places. Some good places fall out, but yeah.
Well, I
Oh,
mean, that's why I wanted to cover this, keep the legacy going. Hopefully recreate some of these dishes or inspire other people to do the same.
yeah.
It's interesting
I
because
think
when one thing I was going to say is when I worked at Eddie and the Wolf, we actually had a duck dish, and we actually did the instead of doing a duck jus, we actually did a duck foam, which was my idea because it was inspired by this. I was like, my chef was like, why don't we do a duck jus? I'm like, why don't we make it into a foam? Like, that egg is like good idea. We just put like a bunch of it was similar like to make a jus. For those who don't know, jus is the French word for juice. It's like you. It's usually based off like the meat, bones, vegetables, other things. You simmer that you cook it like that, strain it off, reduce it down, make it into a sauce. And then with this, you just add the soy lecithin, usually some butter, and then you puree it. And then it whips into the foam. I mean, the foam will sink over time, but if you do it kind of quickly, usually in this sort of situation, you would have a container of the liquid, then you would hit it with this hand mixer, like right before you serve it, put the foam on last minute and run it out. If the foam starts to collapse a little, you add more lecithin. So we did that with this, and also the duck dish, the duck foam, put on last minute and run it out. But again, you have to time it where when people are about to run it, you put the foam on so it doesn't settle too much, and it comes.
Yeah.
It's still a foam when it's on the table. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that looks good. I mean, I don't really have much to say. I'm just thinking about the taste. It sounds like it would be great. Yeah, and of course, this is one that would have a bit higher of a challenge to actually make it. I'm also now thinking, do shellfish have? It's an exoskeleton, so do they have like if you tried to pull the meat out raw, is it like a membrane that holds the meat to the shell, or is the shell always kind of just loose from the actual meat?
I think the meat's just a little too soft, like it would fall apart. Like, because the way you blanch this is you can actually, if you blanch the lobster claw and you do it right, you can split open the shell and then pull the claw out, and the claw is actually like an intact claw with meat. But the thing is, if you were to pull it out raw, the thing would just fall apart, like it's too soft.
Because there's no way where it really sells. But I guess like but shrimp, yeah, it's probably the same as shrimp, but then shrimp itself you can remove the entire shell. You're not pulling the meat out of the shell. So it's probably that kind of same way where there isn't necessarily a membrane holding the shell of the shrimp. But then also with lobster and crab, we're talking about a thicker shell. So there might be something different with its anatomy. But it's okay.
And I was
anything
thinking
else you
with
want to add?
Well, I was just saying with this, I mean, this is another dish you could tweak different ways. Like you could do like butter poached shrimp. You could do instead of what what just occurred to me is actually instead of pumpernickel crunch, do brioche crunch or something. Maybe like brioche and water and fry that, or you could do that. Again, you could do a different type of jus on top, like I was saying, like a different type of foam rather. Like take a different jus and make a foam. I mean, you could do beef and other things. I wouldn't here, but you could if you wanted to. Maitake, I mean, crispy maitake is always good. It's the thing with maitake though is that you have to remember with these mushrooms is if you make them crispy, you lose a lot of volume because the thing is, this was a pain because you have to pull apart all these maitake and you cook it down, it shrinks. So you need a lot to make this dish a lot, but that also factors into your food costs and everything. I mean, you could even just take a cheaper mushroom and saute it or something if you want to maybe save a little, like maybe do, trying to think of another alternative, maybe do like shiitake mushrooms, cut them up, saute them, or you could even do like a grilled thing. Like you could tweak this in different ways if you want like a little more of a budget friendly idea, I guess.
Yeah, and this is still appetizer level. So you're not really that much, but it's still the strength of this dish. I think is something that was it very popular in the restaurant.
Oh yeah, a lot of people ordered this. I mean, you could even do an entree size portion, but you'd have to charge like $40 or something at least, probably. Yeah.
I don't know, but I can imagine this being something people have, and like you need to go and try this at that place. You come back for it several times. Yeah. Okay, anything else you want to add about this?
Nope, that's all I have.
Okay. So the next one, some nice strong colors in this one. It pops off the plate, and this is kind of the contrasting colors. And if you're into art or like painting and things like that, the kind of orangish and green. Those are two kind of contrasting colors. So those things worked well together. So here you have the schweinebauch. Schweinebauch?
Schweinebauch.
Schweinebauch. I saw the Schweinebauch. I can't do
the W has a V sound too, so it's Schweinebauch.
Schweine.
Yeah, you try to say Schweine is one word. Schweine, like you just say it together, like the SCH. Schweine.
Schweinebauch. Is there like more guttural on
the Bauch? Yeah,
Schweinebauch.
Because the CH in German is kind of it. Well, the CH in German is kind of its own sound. Like it's not a K sound, it's not an S sound. It's like something in between. Like you don't say Third Reich, you don't say Third Reich. It's like Third Reich. Like it's like something in between, but it doesn't have an exact English equivalent. So.
All right. So the Schweinebauch. We're gonna go with that for now. That's pork belly, pork jus, chanterelles, mushrooms, English peas, then cauliflower spheres, cauliflower chips, pea foam, and the honey vinegar gel.
Yep. So this was in season springtime, as you can probably tell. Schweinebauch just means pork belly in German again. The way this was cooked, if I recall correctly, was it was cured and then cooked sous vide, and then the liquid that it was cooked in was taken aside and reduced down to a jus. That's what you see glazed over top of the belly. Pork jus, that's the pork jus basically. Chanterelles are a type of mushroom. I like these mushrooms. They have an interesting texture. They're like a little chewy. They look really nice on the plate. Some people pickle them. I don't like that. I like them sauteed like this because it just the flavor's better. Pickling for me is more of a way to sort of like use up other things. English peas, you could probably there's some English peas sort of mixed in with the mushrooms. You can kind of tell they're slightly bigger. Cauliflower spheres. So that's what we talked about with the cauliflower. Do a puree. Put that in the molds with agar agar. They solidify. Then you stamp that out. And that goes on the plate. Cauliflower chips. You slice cauliflower super thin and dehydrate them. That's how you get that. Pea foam. It was like make a pea puree. Think similar to like split pea soup, but minus the ham. Like you'd puree it with like butter and stuff, and then make it really smooth. Put that into a foam gun, shoot it out onto the plate, and then the honey vinegar gel. There's actually honey vinegar. You can probably tell it's kind of like a fermented honey thing. Mix that with agar agar. Put that into a little squeeze bottle. Put it onto the plate. It's like a gel type texture. This is a very Germanic type of dish. I mean, some it's obviously higher end, but I know like they're big on like vinegar again, especially with pork, so kind of works. And then the peas, it's a springtime item. Sure. Thoughts and comments?
Yeah, with the mushrooms, they said when you pickle them, chanterelles are one of them that have a very, depending on the ones that you get, but you can find some really bright kind of striking orange ones. So I think depending on how you pickle them, you could lose that coloration from it, and that's part of the appeal. I think we are visual creatures, with the 99% of us that can see.
The guy I used to work with actually posted today red chanterelles. I thought were interesting. They're they're not red, but they're more reddish. I thought they looked really nice.
So you said those pea foam cauliflower chips, the chanterelles and peas. Okay, you might have explained what are these kind of white things with the specks on them?
That's the cauliflower spheres.
Okay, so
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that would be the thing that's in it. Because it looked like kind of little quail eggs or something. I was like, oh, what?
But that's sort of like what we said above about how like there's like chestnut foam, chestnut chips, celeriac puree, fresh celery. It's kind of a play on it's similar to that, like a cauliflower sphere, which is the puree. It has kind of like a soft, almost like a soft cheese type texture. And then you have the chip, which is crunchy, so it's like cauliflower two ways essentially. And then similar with the peas, because you have a pea foam, so it's a puree that's been aerated, but then you also have actual fresh peas on the plate.
Yeah. So using the kind of two things together.
Yeah.
It's interesting. That seems to be kind of the through line between many of these appetizers that we're doing. And of course, the foam is kind of keeping it thin. If you have the tools, you might as well use it. A lot of people will probably do that. Someone will be like, oh, I'm going to buy this set of tools, and I'm going to use it for one dish. Now, that's the kind of cost-benefit analysis thing. If you're like, okay, we're going to make sure that we have foam guns. If a foam gun goes bad, we're replacing it. But we're replacing it because we have so far how many dishes? Maybe all these dishes weren't on the menu at the same time, but every time there is a menu, there's going to be a few dishes that are going to be using that tool, so it kind of makes sense. Then you're also training people to do it, so the more they know how to do it, the more it can be second nature to the people serving. So you want to be able to maximize the skills that you're training or expecting all the people in the kitchen to have. It seems like a rather economical place so far, but you did mention some of the things. It's like the cost that was going up, the location, the different clientele that's coming through. There's so much that goes into it, but it seems like there were at least some really good decisions being made in the kitchen from my amateur point of view.
Well, it goes to what I said about learning to do versus what not to do. I mean, there's what to do and what not to do in each place. It's just ideally, I think to be successful, you have to pick and choose the best of each world. And you have to think like, okay, this chef had this best technique, but he ran food costs too high, used cheaper items. This chef was efficient, but cut corners. Okay, don't get lazy and sloppy. Like you have to think of like, how do I take the best from each and like build something more successful? I mean, that's how I see it anyway.
Yeah. It seems great. Pork belly, good with pork. Pretty much anything is good. Pork belly is a good cut of pork to have in there. You're going to have some crunchiness there. You're going to have the creams. You're going to have the cauliflower crunchiness from the chips. You also have the spheres part of it with more smoother. Yeah, it just seems good. Then the honey vinegar, sweet and sour type of thing. There, a high level of, at least food wise, it was considered to be top level. Yeah. Anything else you want to add?
Well, I was just going to say pork is big in Austrian and German cooking more generally. Like I remember my old wine teacher talking about going to Germany and getting like pork and bacon at every meal, and it was annoying. And, I mean, for me, that's fine, but they're just they're very big on that. And the other thing I was going to say is one thing about springtime that's kind of annoying is you have all these green vegetables, and green purees especially lose their color. So it gets annoying working in a kitchen because you'll have like like I remember the entremet station, you had like 5 or 6 different green purees, but you have to make them either daily or close to it because the color turns. So it's just like a lot of prep because it's like ramp puree, pea puree, broccoli puree, all this stuff, and then it's
Yeah.
like if the stuff sits out a little bit, starts to turn. Sorry, you got to make it again. It's just really annoying. But I mean, it's like if you're paying good price and it's a high end place, you have to have fresh, bright green stuff every day. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that
Uh,
makes sense.
yeah.
There is a struggle with cooking with greens. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, anything else to add, or is that it?
Not really. No.
Okay. So now we shall move on to the next dish that we have here. This is a I'm Schweinebauch.
Schweinebauch. Yeah.
Schweinebauch.
Yeah.
Schweinebauch. The Bauch and Bauch and
Yeah.
is the kind of good.
You're getting there. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Braised pork belly again, chestnut foam, quince jam, chanterelle mushrooms, honey vinegar gel. Now you can see already many of these things were prepared in the other one. So if you have this on the menu at the same time as the other one, when you're making the prep for not getting directly to plate it and put it out there, that prep is still there. So you don't have like now 20 different foams because it's like 20 different dishes used. You have those. That seems good. And I think I'm more informed and I can order things in a better way. And I said, okay, there was a lot of effort put into this. I can see the process going through this. I can just appreciate that these people kind of seem to have a good idea. They seem to care, put some thought and some influence into what they're doing, some actual action, and they're not just reading off of somebody else's script. They're actually doing something. It's actually a passion project, but it's something that I think is value added to just getting food, if that makes any sense.
Sure. So this is the similar components to what was above on the sweetbreads. Now I should point out that these were run at separate times because if you think about it, if there's a table where someone gets sweetbreads, someone gets pork belly, and they both have this on it, it's redundant, and people are kind of going to be like, the chef's not very creative. If it's just the same components. So what I think happened was one of these dishes had the garnish, then they changed it for something else, then it went to the other one. So that way it's like they can still use up the components, but because the other thing too is what would happen if someone were to get pork belly and sweetbreads at the same time and they both have the same stuff, it'd be kind of redundant. But the difference here was that, again, chanterelle mushrooms and also the quince jam. The quince, for those that don't know, it's apple pear family. It's a very starchy vegetable. You have to add a lot of sugar to it because on its own, it's like biting into an ultra starchy apple that isn't sweet. So you have to add sugar and cook it down. Now, the chef was big on, he only cooked it lightly here because if you cook quince down heavily, it actually gets a deep orange color. Here, it's more of like a light yellow color. So here he was cooking it enough so it sort of lost that texture, but it's still kind of on the lighter side. If I remember correctly, I think he put sugar in there, maybe like a touch of vinegar just to like spice it up a little. But everything else, it's a similar components as above. So.
Yeah, the plating seems similar as you mentioned, and like you said, if you have it in different ones, and if somebody has learned how to make this process, it's not like there's something that you learn when you're doing something enough. In there, it's been on the menu for 3 months. Even if it's cutting down. When you first started making this, let's say you first started making the chestnut foam. Maybe it was taking you a minute to do the full prep. If you've done it for a month, it might cut down to 45 seconds.
Yeah.
So now to find a different dish that you're going to have in the next time the menu changes, that's already at the 45 seconds. You're not kind of doing an extra like learning curve. And these seconds do matter when you're in the back there trying to time things. Sometimes it's a massive slam and you're just like, okay, too many things to come in. So those seconds really do matter. And also the customers coming, now this depends on the customers. For some customers, they might be like, oh, you changed my favorite dish. But if they had a really good dish and then, the dish itself isn't still on the menu due to seasonality, but there's aspects of that dish that appeal to you that are now in this other dish. So somebody might switch from that and say, okay, I'll try they never tried the Schweinebauch before, but now they're like, oh, now it has the chestnut foam. I really like the chestnut set. So I think that's something that's probably considered, right?
Yeah, because I would also point out that it's also a question of like what's available. Because it's like if you come in spring, you're going to get fresh English peas and pea foam, but that's a spring vegetable. And it's like you could get frozen peas and do it the rest of the year, but one, it's not seasonal and the quality is not going to be as the same. Whereas like if you go to Union Square and you pick out like good peas and puree them, it's going to taste a lot better than like these cheap mass-produced peas that have sat in the freezer. And it's one of those things where I think, working front of the house, you have to be more diplomatic in how you explain it. Like, the chef uses what's available. We apologize, but this is out of season, so we've changed it to this. Would you like to try this instead? You know, there are diplomatic ways to go about it, but that's kind of the angle you have to do, because otherwise it's like, you know, you're not going to get like, you know, a dish with strawberries year round likely or something like that. Yeah.
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 Yeah, it's not going to be really good strawberries.
No.
These strawberries
No.
don't taste like salisberries. Okay. So anything else to add?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, so we're on to the next one. It's like a little like flying, like jet kind of. Okay, this again, Schweinebauch. I think it's
Yep, there you go.
Schweinebauch.
Yep,
I'm getting better at it. Okay, finally, New Year's version. This is a pickled onion jam and a cheese foam and a crostini.
Sure. So this was kind of interesting because this was the German chef Rene. He didn't like to do the slabs. He liked to do them in sort of a bacon shape. I don't know if that's more of a Germanic thing or just his style or what. But the thing is, a lot of people don't know that. Well, you can technically eat bacon out of the package. It's cooked. It's just people don't like that texture. Yeah, because the thing is, it's been hot smoked. So the hot smoke is what cooks it. So you could eat it straight out of the package. It's not like eating raw beef. But the thing is, people don't like that texture. They think it's weird. But the thing is, it's a similar thing with this pork belly where it was braised, but then it was cut into slices like that. And then he wrapped it around pickled onion jam. I think you can kind of tell, you know, onions that were caramelized. There's some vinegar added, so it has more of a acidic flavor. You know, that was wrapped around, that was in the middle of the belly. Crostini, just some like a thin toasted piece of bread. Typically, the way you would make this is you take bread you take bread, you freeze it, you slice it on a deli slicer super thin, and then you would actually you would bake the pieces, and they would sort of like curl up like that. Usually you would do it around something. And then the cheese foam, I'm trying to remember what was in the cheese foam. I think it might have been like a more cheddar type thing, but it was like cheese. There was some butter in there, some I'm trying to remember if there was less than, so there was something in there to sort of like emulsify it, and you shot it out of the gun as well. So you think about it, it's like cheese, pork belly, and like onions with like a little bit of vinegar. So it's kind of a German style dish. That was his idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I need to get me one of these foam guns.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I like the plating. It looks like it's like flying off, kind of. Just looks like it's in motion a bit. One thing that these plates, why is there seems to be a tendency to have like a really big plate and it's like something in the middle. Is this like the visual aspect, something appealing to it? I personally
I'm not
prefer
sure. I'm not sure how or why that started, but it's a common theme. I've seen it a lot of places.
Yeah, I prefer smaller plates. I prefer like the food to be like 50% of the plate to be the food.
Yeah.
I mean, like at least like getting close, like maybe 40% around there. But this one is like the plate comes, it's like 10% is food, the rest of it is plate. I don't know. It's
I remember somebody commenting a while ago on one of my posts. They're like, "Wow, can you eat the plate too?" or something like that.
Yeah, maybe just something to do with excess, or just there might be something to do with appearance. I think I would probably have to see similar dishes plated on smaller plates if they fit, because I know when you have like tapas, maybe there's an aspect of it being small plate, because a lot of these places are technically tapas. Like the amount of food is technically similar as when you have tapas, but I think the probably difference with tapas, it's actually in a small dish as well.
Yeah.
Uh,
Because if you remember at Casamono, like the foie, not Casamono, Huertas, if you remember, like the foie gras is on a little plate like that big, but there's only a little more space on the plate, whereas this is like in the middle of a thing. So sorry, you were starting to say something about New Year's? Yeah.
Yeah, with a New Year's version, does that mean just like something to do with like starts of the new year, or is it like on New Year's Day? Is it what was?
It was on New Year's Eve. Like New Year's Eve, there's usually a tasting menu, and like the chefs would design certain the chefs would design like a tasting menu for that day. They usually charge a certain amount of money. Usually it's served with champagne. If the place is open at midnight, like, you know, everyone typically gets champagne and they do a cheers, you know.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't really have too much to say, but yeah, I think again, mouthfeel. Keep saying that word, but it definitely does work. You get to have the crunchiness of the bread, and you get to have the pork belly. And if you think about it, it's kind of like ham, pretty much. Yeah, if you really think about it, if you can probably buy certain hams and fry them, and maybe be close to baconish, so yeah, it makes sense. Or prosciutto, most definitely. In Italy, there's a lot of foods that are served just cuts of pork that are sold just as is from the store that are technically bacon that you could just fry. It's maybe cut thinner. That would be one of the things that's a bit different. Maybe it's a bit drier, a bit thinner, less fatty. But yeah, I can imagine that.
You could also mix up the cheeses and the foam itself. I think this was more cheddar, if I recall. Like, I'm trying to remember if it was like a white cheddar or what, but like you'd have to alter the recipe, but maybe something with Gruyere. I mean, you could do a different type of bread. You could do crispy pork belly instead of braised,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So on years, was it normally entire, mostly like 50% new dishes that they would just try out?
Usually it was like a certain tasting menu. Usually you charge a little more money because it's a holiday and there's usually special stuff. But usually it's like items just for that day. If certain items got good feedback or they were left over, they might like run them as a special or put them on the menu. But it was
Yeah.
also like depending on, like if there were certain dishes that everyone said, "Wow, this is great, let's keep this." You would keep it. Like at my last shop, Felidia, there was a dish called cacio and pere, which is actually a play on two dishes because there's a dish in Italian, cacio e pepe, and then there's a dish pecorino e pere. It's sort of a juxtaposition of both those. It was a ravioli with pear and cheese inside, and there was more cheese grated over top. It was on the menu, I think, like 14, 15 years, and it was one of those things that they were going to take off the menu, but apparently there was a backlash, so they had to keep it on. But there's things like that if enough people come and ask for it, it's like, why not just keep running it?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a demand, provide the supply. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. Okay. I have nothing else to say. Just anything else?
That's it. Yeah. No.
Okay. So now we're on, and that was also the second time cheese has shown up in this one. I think this looks like some great dishes here, but I think it's cheese starved. It's a bit too cheese starved for my liking, but hey, that does happen.
There was also a cheese plate that they offered as well. I didn't have any pictures. I didn't include it because there weren't that many choices. There were it's kind of like Minetta Tavern where there's a cheese plate, but there's like 3 things on it. So it's not really a big featured item. It's more, we have it because people will ask for it, but it's not like the main focus. Whereas Les Bollier, but like Les Bollier, where I did my externship, the cheese cart had like 30 something cheeses on it. But it's like that's not as common anymore because it's like, it's like, to people like us, it's cool, but if you're not selling all those cheeses, you're just going to throw a lot of money down the drain. That's a problem.
Yeah. Okay, so next one?
Yep.
Okay, here we have a Valentine's Day pasta,
Yep.
which is a cabbage with wagyu beef cannelloni, an apple gel, red cabbage, and apple broth with hearts on fire. And this is not Austrian.
So this was very interesting because this was on the Valentine's Day menu, like I say, and what it was that when he broke down the beef, there were a lot of trimmings that could be used. So what he did was he made a pasta dough. There was actually red cabbage in it, which is why the pasta is that color. And then he would wrap that pasta around the beef trimmings and then cook that. And then on the dish here, there's red cabbage, typical like the Germanic, Scandinavian style braised red cabbage. Like there's vinegar, there's juniper berries, there's maybe. I'm trying to remember if there were caraway seeds or something more in that direction. And then there's apple gel. It was the apple juice with the agar agar, so it's thickened like a gel. And then you would put that in a squeeze bottle, pipe a little onto the plate. So this was a very creative dish because it was a way to use up those scraps of wagyu. You could make a pasta, then cabbage is inexpensive, apple juice just thickened with agar, and it's still a very nice dish, but it's a way to use up other items. And then the hearts and fire, just the greens as we've discussed. Yep. Any thoughts or comments?
Yeah, as you said, I appreciate the ingenuity or the ingenuity is the word. Yeah, I appreciate that of using like different things in different ways, and also going the red with the Valentine's Day. I really like red cabbage. There's a lot of interesting things you can do with it. Really strong kind of purplish taste, can bleed off into other things as well. So that's something to be aware of. And this whole idea of putting the red cabbage in the actual dough that's making the pasta ahead of time, that's something I can nod my hat to, because that's something that I've been doing for some time as well, primarily with like chapatis and ugali. And ugali is pretty much just maize meal. It's like more like solid porridge. Like you pretty much make porridge and then you add more flour into it till it's harder. That's a typical dish here in Kenya, ugali. And then there's also chapatis, which is typical in Kenya as well, which is brought over by the Indians, which you pretty much just make a fats, flour, and water, maybe some salt, and you make this typical dough. Then you roll them out into different. You fry them, you pan fry them. So with both of those things, I've attempted now with adding like soy sauce, and then like if you add soy sauce and coconut milk in the ugali in that maize meal, it really creates a kind of coffee type of color, and it's like more creamy and things like that. The taste comes out more like chocolatey with a mix of the coconut and the soy somehow. it's cool. And then with the I call that flavali, the flavor, and the flavatis, which you just now add like I chop up actual vegetables. Spices was the first thing I did, but then now I've actually gone into actually adding veg chopped up puree type of thing into the actual dough and things like that. And those are the kind of like value added things that I suggest. If this a thing that you like, learn how to make some aspects of it at home, because now that you're doing it at home, you can now start making these things. Like you're not good to go by the store and find a what's it called, a red cabbage infused pasta. It's just not really going to happen. But if you have a pasta maker at home, you can just have some time on some holidays or some weekends, get together with a family or whatnot, and you just make a whole bunch of dough, and then now you have that for a couple of weeks or months. It's something that I think is value added to do, and it's good to see this kind of ingenuity, this kind of creativity in the kitchen.
I'll try to find it for you and send it to you, but there was a really interesting dish at Felidia. It was actually there before I started, but it was on Valentine's Day, they made it was a pasta, but instead, oh, here you go. It's cappalace, which is like a type of ravioli. There's duck and foie gras inside a porcini broth, and it was colored, I want to say, with beets, and it was actually stamped out into hearts. So it looked really cool, but it was like, it's still like heart-shaped ravioli with, duck foie gras, and there's porcini, but like it was cool how they actually had the color and the shape as well. Yeah, I'll send you photos. Maybe we can do another presentation on Felidia, but I thought it was very cool how they had hearts shaped Valentine. They had a ravioli shaped like hearts on Valentine's Day. I thought that was a nice touch.
Yeah, and so that's for me. Like I haven't really dated too much. I mean, even when I was dating, wasn't too big on Valentine's Day. But that's something that's probably really massive. New Year's, like you said, New Year's Day, and that's actually most of the restaurants that we've talked about. There's been some Valentine's Day, there's been some New Year's Day type of things, and those would be massive days for the restaurant industry. It would probably be a thing where you want to really, really impress, because a lot of people that might be the first time they come to your place, so you want to serve certain things to kind of get people in, and having this red, this color, I think that would be something that would stick out in the memory of people. Like, yeah, so I think that's
do you know what the busiest day of the year is typically?
One second, let me
restaurants
think. I'm trying to think. It would probably be the day after some day where a lot of people had to cook somehow, I think. So I'm thinking
Mother's Day. Mother's Day is the big one. Yeah, because like
if you work, you don't want your mom to cook, so you take the mother out to cook.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Even diners get slammed on Mother's Day. Like I've noticed that. Like there was like where I grew up, there was like a nicer diner, and even that place was packed. And I remember Bar Balloon, because we had brunch as well as dinner there. I remember like brunch, you would start with like 300 covers. Like that's most of the dining room, and then like dinner would be like more than that. So it's like the whole day you're just slammed.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. Were you with anyone for this Valentine's Day? Actually, this is a place you worked. But yeah, I'll start asking you if you had any of these Valentine's Day dishes that you're presenting with a date, or was this yourself?
No, because anything when I was working when I was in the kitchen, I was always working, so I was preparing them or I was serving the other dishes alongside them. So
for some people, they seem to not like. I am completely okay with going to restaurants by myself. Like, but I know we are very rather different in certain senses.
Any senses.
I know you like going to restaurants by yourself. I don't mind it at all. Just going and sitting at my table and just listening to audiobooks or just drawing, just thinking. Like I do that on a regular basis. But for some people, they feel like they have to be with somebody to go to a restaurant, which is.
I think it's insecurity. I mean, maybe I can't speak for them, but like, because for me, it's like if I go to Minetta Tavern, I usually sit at the bar and just talk to the bartender who takes care of me. If I sit at a table, I just bring reading material and read what in between eating. It's like, but there are other people that I know that like they have to be seen with somebody or they feel like dejected or something. I don't know.
There's probably a connection with the people who can't cook for themselves, who also don't go out and eat by themselves. If you cook for yourself, then you've at least had practice eating by yourself because you're by yourself at home and sometimes cooking. But if you can't cook for yourself, by virtue of you not being able to prepare the food, probably all the foods in your life have included somebody else being there cooking the actual food or having the food with you. So that's probably something that's more that you're used to doing. No. Some human behavioral psychology we're getting into there. Definitely, if y'all are interested in human behavioral psychology, like I am, like Steven is, Steven probably had some like Robert Sapolsky lectures from Stanford. He has like a 26 lecture series that's on YouTube. Definitely check that stuff out. Amazing stuff. Amazing Amazing stuff to consume. You are what you consume, and this is consuming stuff, information about what other humans consume to make the behavior that makes you the human that you are today. It's excellent stuff for your mind. Yeah. Okay, so anything else?
No, that's it.
Okay, so the next one, here we go. Stephen will be glad on this one. Stephen is human foie gras, and this dish is, for him, it's a foie gras terrine, is lemon camomile gel, lemon zest on top, and a brioche.
Sure. So this was actually very interesting. So there's the terrine. You can see it's shaped like a cylinder. I'm trying to remember exactly how he made this. If he cured it, then rolled it up. It's not a torchon exactly. A torchon is where you break down the foie gras, you cure it, you roll it up in cheesecloth, you blanch it, you hang it, it dries. This isn't that. This was a terrine that he made in a mold somehow. I don't remember exactly. But what's very interesting on this one is if you look very closely, you can see a slight layer around the outside of the foie gras. There's actually a layer of lemon chamomile gel going around the outside.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So then when you scoop down in it, you get that. And then up front here is a little chamomile gel. There's some pieces of the flour inside it. That's that weird texture. On top, there's lemon zest, some sea salt, some greens. Brioche was just cut into rectangles, and he just broke it like that. I don't know. That was his thing. A little cocoa powder underneath. Cocoa powder adds a little bit of flavor, but it was also to because this is a cylinder, it would roll around on the plate. This was so it would just stand upright.
Oh yeah, that's some practical use to add something in there, and it's just because cocoa powder itself. There's this one funny meme, and there's many funny memes in the world, but this one where it's like expectation versus actual results, and it's like a kid just getting like a spoonful of cocoa, and he just puts it in his mouth, like a tablespoon. This kid's like 5 or 6, sticks like a tablespoon of cocoa. The dad is recording, the dad or the mom, the parent, because like from a higher angle, they're just recording it. Just let you kids experience certain things. And he just puts it in his mouth. And then he just kind of closes his mouth, he's looking ahead, looks at the dad, or looks at whoever's filming, and looks back, and then the coughs start. And it's just like coming out of the mouth. Like cocoa powder itself, unsweetened, is not normally a really tasty thing, but if it's this little amount, you're probably not really getting too much in it. It's probably not playing. Yeah, you said it's more for the practical nature of holding the dish together. Yeah, that's got to be interesting with the lemon zest. Let me taste the sweetness of the brioche with the fluffiness of the bread, the starchiness of the bread. Then you have the creaminess of the foie gras. It seems like an interesting. On your general foie gras, I know we don't have favorites. We've been over that, but is this on your above average or below average preparations of foie gras that you've experienced, had, or seen?
So a little bit above. I think the technique is very clever. The whole idea of the gel around the outside, like that was a little hard to pull off. The flavors are okay. The flavors are more subtle because chamomile, if you have it, it's like if you've had chamomile tea, it tastes kind of like that. It's more subtle. There's a little bit of salt and sugar, but it doesn't taste like a lot. I think with foie, because it's so fatty, you need something a little more aggressive. But I would also point out that this was springtime and he was trying to like do flowers and things, so like it kind of makes sense. Definitely, I'd recommend it. It wasn't my top favorite. Not the next one, but I think the one after that would probably be one of my top. We'll get to that in a little bit. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So I have nothing else to say about this, unless you do.
No, I mean, I just like I said, I'm not entirely sure how he made it because it was like if you notice with foie gras torchon, if you cut inside, you'll actually see chunks of foie gras because it's broken up and you want to hold the pieces. This was very smooth, so I'm trying to remember if he pushed it through a tammy like a sieve and then put that into a mold. I wish I remembered what he did, but then I remember when he treated it, he actually I'm trying to remember if he like put it in a mold and then put like the liquid around and then it solidified and then he cut off the ends so you have this like cylinder with the gel around. I don't remember 100% what he did, but that's like kind of what I remember. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm glad you said it because I think that was the question I was going to come back and ask, like how.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's probably it. Maybe if you found a way to, there was maybe like if you have some kind of cylinder and that cylinder has a diameter of 1 inch, and then you can find a way to make sure you cut the actual cylinder of the foie gras into something that's maybe like 5/8 of an inch, or maybe even like 7/8 of an inch, or whatever. Just like, I'm going with eighths instead of what we're talking about. It leaves some space on the outside, so if you put that in and you have maybe like a 50 millimeters of it, so it's not full in the cylinder, but once you put something in there, it will displace the thing and then go on the outside of the foie. That, yeah, it might have been something like that, but then maybe you cool it down. Was this a cold dish or a room temperature dish?
It's a cold dish, yeah. Cold, because
Okay.
typically with foie gras, any of these terrines, torchons, the slices, that's typically cold. If it's hot, it would be foie, and you would see like the crusty, like the browned exterior. There's usually score marks, but all this stuff usually does get heated because you have to like heat it at some point to prepare it, but then it cools down and then you serve it cold. So like this is spring, like I say, the items, but also in spring and summer, it's more common to have cold foie gras than winter. You do the hot stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
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 If y'all like foie, this is unfortunately one of the foies off the table since the restaurant is closed.
Yeah.
But if you're a foie gras hunter, this is one that you might have missed in New York City.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
The next one.
Yep.
Okay. Here we have. Oh my. Yeah. Okay. Ganzeleber.
Gänseleber.
So why is that le Ganzele?
So
Okay.
in German, the umlaut over the a gives it either a long a sound or like an s sound. Because if it were gans, it would be gans. But then with the umlaut, it's gens or gains. But it's gens. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ganzeleber with topped with something glühwein.
Glühwein.
Glühwein. Why do I keep going vein? Glühwein jelly and a beet hazelnut powder and beet puree. This looks. I mean, yeah, interesting. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. So the glühwein is that the actual wine? Is that why it's red? It's like a red wine, like a reduction.
So I'll explain here. So Gänseleber just means goose liver. It's what they call foie gras. I mean, technically, not all goose liver is foie gras because you could just kill a goose, eat the liver straight away, but it would have a different texture. Whereas if it's a foie gras liver, it's going to be force fed and all this. So it's just what they just call foie gras goose liver, but they're not technically the same. So Glühwein, it basically, I forget the exact translation, but it's the equivalent of, think of, we call it mulled wine or like spiced holiday wine. You actually mix that with gelatin and you make a, they laid it out over top, and then you would cut it, and there would actually be a layer of that on top that you would bite into when you scoop into the foie gras. Yep.
Okay.
So you have like that mold spiced holiday wine. You think of there's usually like there's some orange zest in there. There's usually like cloves, cardamom. There's that stuff with like a sweeter red wine. So when you bite into the foie, you get the foie gras with that. A little bit of sea salt on the top. That's the texture. Beet puree, I think it was just roasted beets pureed. The beet hazelnut powder, I think it was the tapioca powder with the hazelnut oil, and a little bit of beet juice for color. Not too much, because too much beet juice, the powder would collapse, and you just want a little bit to give it that like pinkish color. I apologize. I'm not sure what the white were. I think those might have been creme fraiche spheres, but I'm not 100%. And there's a little white thing on the left, but I'm not sure about that either. This was a slightly different version of this. The one that we have next was the final version, which I ended up preferring. But this is certainly no slouch either. And there's a little chervil for microgreens. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I really like this plating. See, something like this. I'm trying to see if you just had like, you can see kind of on that thing. There's a kind of a disc where the plate starts angling up. Now I'm wondering how it would look if that was the size of the plate. So some of the things maybe make sense to have the bigger plate. I can kind of see that with the spread of the dish if it's on a line that kind of way. Yeah. My whole pulling back from the big dish is when the stuff is like clumped in the middle. So I think if you whatever the diameter, if you make a circle around the food, I think it shouldn't be more than double that on the outside. I think, in my estimation. If I was running a restaurant, I think that's what I'd have in mind. But hey, these people have a Michelin Star restaurant. I do not, so who am I to really? But they're also closed. I'm kidding.
Well, I just thought it'd be kind of like giving someone like a big glass that's like partway full. It's like, what's the point? You're like, where's the rest of my drink? Like, that's kind of how I feel. Whereas like if you give a shot, it's like, okay, you expect there to be a tiny bit because that's the amount you're served because it's so potent or whatever. But it's like if you get like a stein of beer, the thing is full, but it's a lot of beer, but it's a lighter beer that you can drink more of. Things like that. And that's kind of, I have a similar feeling with these plates here. What's it?
Don't they do that with some wines? Isn't that how you're supposed to serve certain wines in like less than half full glasses?
Yeah, but the thing is that's different because the thing is the wine has to aerate, so you want that space
Okay.
so that it can kind of aerate. Cognac, you do the same thing. I posted an Armagnac from Minetta Tavern. I don't know if you saw, but that's famous for that too. There's like a big glass and it's like partway full, but that's you want it to sort of aromatize. But the thing is with things like beer or like a shot, it's like you're just gonna drink it as is. Like a beer is not gonna aerate and get better as it sits. So.
Okay, so this I'm thinking maybe coming from like the background of a visual artist, maybe it's like a
Yep.
frame or like a border. Because sometimes you're like mounting a piece or even putting a painting up, you'll have like a white or black border on the outside where you maybe want the person who's looking at it to have enough of a border that breaks them, that makes them focus on it. So it's kind of a putting it aside from the negative space out there. The space out there is bringing you into the actual dish and you're not being distracted by the table or the plate or anything else out there. So maybe
Yeah.
it tunnels you into it. There could be something with that. Yeah. I don't
Yeah.
know.
It's a good question. I mean, if more people know, I'm curious if anyone has any
Yeah.
ideas. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm thinking now with this one, with the beet powder, so it's more like wet sand. There was these kind of like toy sand, like when we were kids, where it was a kind of a sandy thing where when you put it in the water, it would kind of clump together, but when you pour it out, it kind of falls together. I don't think it's necessarily that way, but it's because it's more wet. Maybe just like wet sand a bit,
It's
because it's not necessarily.
no, it's drier than that. It's interesting because with this tapioca powder is that when you bite into it, it tastes like powder, but it's pleasant. Like it's not like biting into flour or something. Like it's actually pleasant, but like it sort of dissolves in your mouth, so you'll get the flavor. But like the way it hits the idea is that it can absorb the oil, but if it hits liquid, it's gonna like completely fizzle out. But that's how it works when you eat it because it absorbs the oil, it holds the powder, but then you put it in your mouth, it just dissolves. But you get the impact of the flavor with the dish.
This is interesting, the breakdown, the melting in the mouth, the things working together, powderiness, creaminess. And I'd mentioned before in the previous conversations we had how some things could be switched around in the menu. And I'm thinking something like this could be served as a dessert. Like if I saw this on the
Yeah,
dessert menu, I think it would fit.
yeah.
Have you
You could
found
well,
foie gras on a dessert menu anywhere?
Yeah, I have actually. I've seen foie gras ice cream too. What I was going to say, the other thing you could do is we started to talk about the oils, how you can mix these in with tapioca powder. And the thing is, you could take any type of oil. So you could get tapioca powder. You could do a pumpkin seed oil powder. You could do an olive oil powder. You could do the different flavored oils. You could make those into powder. You could do a garlic infused oil. I think garlic infused powder. I think I've seen that actually. I mean, anything that's oil based, you just mix it in with the powder and you can serve that on the plate. So I'm thinking again when I have a kitchen, getting tapioca powder and just fooling around with different stuff because I've seen powders on desserts too. So you could do powders, do a savory powder, do a dessert powder. You could do, I mean, a lot of different things you could do. Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Because you can have the flavors of the oil, but at the same time, you're not just bite like nobody wants to just bite into oil on a plate. It's like you have the flavor of it, but the texture dissolves in your mouth. It's kind of nice. Yeah.
Yeah. The way sneaking foods in. Some people would sneak certain foods into you where you're like, oh, I enjoyed that. And then they tell you what it
Mm,
is. Like, oh, wow, I never really
mm,
considered having that. So yeah, this is
mm.
one of those things. And okay, so I don't really have much else to say this, but we're up to about the 1.5 mark, so I think we can lead them on a cliffhanger. We can
Sure.
tie this off with foie gras, and then we'll come back. We can come back with the next part with
Sure.
the final form of this. This is like freezer. It's not even my final form of ganze leber,
Uh,
but the next part will open up with
yeah,
the better form, the upgraded form of the next level form of ganze leber from Seäsonal. So
sure.
yeah, anything else you want to say about this? This we're still in the appetizers too, but we're about
Yeah.
halfway through the document. So probably at least two more parts of this that are going to be coming. The first part has already been posted up on as we're recording right now, so y'all can go check that out if you haven't checked that out. And then that was part. This is now part. This is the part 13 of the You Are What You Consume series. But this is the fifth restaurant that we're doing, but many of the restaurants had multiple parts. So there's at least, if you haven't seen any other dish in your dish, there's at least 10 other parts out there that you can go out and watch while you wait for the next part, which we're going to be recording at least next week, sometime this week. But we're trying to have at least a series where we're releasing these every Monday for the upcoming, for the foreseeable future. We shall be having some food related thing on Mondays, so you can follow us wherever you're getting this content from. Anything else you want to say to the peoples?
No, not a whole lot. What I was gonna say is I like the way I set this up from going to lighter to heavier, because some of the earlier amuse-bouche and appetizers aren't as exciting, but once we get into entrees, there's some pretty intricate stuff. So I like the way this is set because it kind of escalates over time. I mean, not to say that the early stuff was bad either, but like if I started with like some of these entrees and went to amuse-bouche, it'd kind of fall flat. So I think this is a very good pathway to go here. Sure.
Yeah, well, they are amuse bouches and they're appetizers, so you consume. So this is like a dish. So you're taking that, you starts it off, gets your mental mind watered to get the actual entrees, and then we'll close it off. There's desserts in this restaurant, right?
Yep.
So we'll also close it off for that in the last one. But
Yep.
yeah, it's been great as usual, Steve. I feel like repetitive saying this, but I guess some people are coming on the first time. But yeah, we've been doing this for we've been doing different videos talking to Steven for almost 5 years now. I think we wanted to get 22. I think the first one recorded was 17 around there. But yeah,
sounds about right. Yeah, yeah, good times.
Yeah. Okay. So if you have nothing else to say,
no.
All right.
So I have nothing else.
Guys, gals, and everything else in between, thank you all very much. Come back next Monday. Go back and check out all this stuff. Steven, say goodbye to the peoples.
Goodbye. Enjoy your Labor Day, everybody.
Goodbye. Okay.
Ayah. Wewe hapa nitaongelea haya wacha hiyo kwanza iishe.